The basis for the Greek debt lies in the policies of the European Central Bank. Basically, they created this rule where central banks cannot loan to governments. Basically, their idea was that this is what happened in Germany with hyperinflation before the Nazi Empire. So they wanted to avoid this by making that rule. See, the problem is that's not what caused hyperinflation in Nazi Germany. It was actually war reparations, where the country was obligated to print more money to purchase the foreign currency to pay the debts that were placed upon them by the nations that were allied on the other side. The economic models used by the European Central Bank included international and financial rentier dimensions. What they leave out is the government sector role. They limit to private sector transactions, production and consumption without reference to assets, purchase, and credit. European Central Bank policy fails to differentiate between real economy and creating credit, treasury debt, to give banks to buy or lend against assets in the hopes of bolstering prices on real estate, stocks, and bonds. Now, the European Central Bank did do quantitative easing, just as the UK and the US did, both of which prevented a deflationary spiral. But the problem is, Greece didn't bother to go ahead and invest any of that money into things like public works that would stimulate jobs and then create a taxable income and do all the things that both the US and the UK did. Instead, they saw that any government role whatsoever would be inherently damaging. So as a result, they never had any real value creation. There was no real economy. Thus, all that money that was printed out was just something done to inflate the balance sheets of banks in order to stabilize their health. But in the end, nothing was actually created that was taxable to pay that money back. That debt is treasury bills that were bought by French, German, and Belgian banks. They were the ones who purchased Greek debt. And what they needed was a two-pronged approach, a social infrastructure spending and a balance sheet help. Banks demanded none of the former because it creates debt. They saw government debt as wage and asset price inflation, instead of acknowledging stimulation spending. So basically, in the end, there was nothing to tax in order to pay that money back, since finance had already gone through massive tax breaks, or particularly as it relates to capital gains. There was nothing left to tax. There were no workers to tax or a middle class to tax. So that debt overhead that the government was holding went completely unpaid. And that's how a monetary policy ended up becoming a financial crisis. Essentially, the elite of the capitalist class, particularly the finance sector, were bailed out, not everyday regular working people that were left without jobs to spend money on goods and services. So the problem is underemployment and debt deflation, not inflation. So all the votes that we saw about the Greek debt crisis and what it is they wanted to do, and Yanis Varoufakis stepped down as minister, and we had that whole big, public vote, the referendum. They were voting on whether or not there should be a big bailout for big business, or whether whatever money is left should be spent on social spending. Obviously, this was the lower class, the working class, rejecting a bailout of the capitalist class. And that's essentially, like in a nutshell, made very simple, the entire Greek debt crisis that began in 2011. Thank you for watching. Want to go ahead, rate, comment, subscribe, and share on various social media. And if you want, you can head over to my Patreon page and show your support. Or you could head over to the MRN bookstore and check out some of the latest books available.